In the golden age of the Persian Empire, where kings wielded absolute power and fortunes could change in an instant, one clever fisherman discovered the most valuable currency was not gold, but flattery. This ordinary man, weathered by years on the sea and struggling to feed his family, never imagined that a single extraordinary catch would lead him to the gleaming throne room of King Khusro Pervez himself. The magnificent fish that nearly broke his nets would become his ticket to unimaginable wealth, but only if he could navigate the dangerous waters of royal politics. When faced with the intimidating gaze of the king and asked what reward he expected, the fisherman made a calculated gamble that would either elevate or destroy him. His clever response pleased the king, but the sharp-eyed Queen Shirin saw through his manipulation. When a single golden coin slipped from his grasp, revealing what appeared to be unforgivable greed, the fisherman faced his greatest test. His quick-witted explanation would either expose him as an ungrateful commoner or prove him a master of understanding the king's ego. This ancient tale reveals the timeless truth about power, pride, and the psychology of those who rule. Before we start the video, buckle up, get ready, and subscribe for a special surprise. Dawn crept across the waters of the Persian Gulf, painting the gentle waves with strokes of amber and gold. The small fishing boat rocked steadily as Navid cast his nets into the sea, his weathered hands moving with practiced efficiency despite the early hour. At 45, his face had been carved by years of salt and sun, deep lines etching his sun-bronzed skin like the intricate patterns on Persian tapestries. The boat, an inheritance from his father, showed signs of its age in the patched wood and worn ropes, but it remained seaworthy through Navid's constant care. The morning air carried the familiar scent of brine as he worked methodically, thoughts drifting to his modest home where his wife and 3 children still slept. The past season had been difficult, with smaller catches and increasing taxes from the royal treasury. His oldest daughter would soon reach marriageable age, and he had little saved for her dowry. These worries were constant companions during his solitary mornings at sea. Navid allowed his net to sink into the deeper waters, a deviation from his usual fishing grounds. Something had drawn him further from shore today, an inexplicable feeling that had awakened him earlier than usual and guided his boat to this unfamiliar spot. The waters here were known to be unpredictable, sometimes yielding magnificent catches, other times nothing at all. As he began to draw in his first cast, the resistance in the ropes immediately told him something unusual had happened. The net pulled back with unexpected weight, forcing him to brace his feet against the side of the boat to maintain his balance. His heart quickened as he strained against the unexpected burden, muscles burning with effort. Could it be merely seaweed or debris caught in the mesh? Or had fortune finally smiled upon him? "By the grace of Ahura Mazda," he muttered, invoking the name of the supreme deity as the struggle continued. With a final heave that sent pain shooting through his shoulders, the net broke the surface. Navid's breath caught in his throat. Thrashing within the woven strands was a fish of such magnificent size and beauty that for a moment he wondered if he had caught one of the mythical creatures from the stories his grandmother once told. Its scales gleamed iridescent in the morning light, shifting between silver and blue with every movement. It was nearly as long as a man's arm and thicker around than a warrior's thigh. Navid had spent his life on these waters and had never seen such a specimen. With considerable effort, he managed to haul the massive creature into his boat, where it continued its protest, powerful tail slapping against the wooden planks. After ensuring it could not escape, he sat back on his heels, staring in wonder at his extraordinary catch. The usual procedure would be to head directly to the market in the city, where such a magnificent fish would fetch an exceptional price from wealthy merchants or noble households. It would provide enough coin to ease his family's burdens for weeks, perhaps months. Yet, as he studied the creature's remarkable form, a different thought began to take shape in his mind. King Khusro Pervez, the great Sasanian monarch whose empire stretched across vast territories, was known for his appreciation of exceptional things. Stories circulated through the kingdom of his lavish palace with gardens that bloomed in winter, of his collection of rare treasures from distant lands, and of his legendary generosity to those who pleased him. The king's fondness for impressive gifts was well known, as was his willingness to reward those who brought such offerings. Navid ran his calloused hand over the fish's gleaming scales. This was no ordinary catch to be sold to a merchant or cook. This was a specimen worthy of a king. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. Common fishermen did not present themselves at the palace gates. The royal court operated in a world entirely separate from Navid's daily existence of nets and tides and humble sustenance. Yet what did he have to lose? If he took this magnificent creature to market, he would earn a good sum, but nothing that would fundamentally change his family's circumstances. If he dared to present it to the king, the outcome was uncertain but potentially transformative. "Sometimes the greatest catches require the boldest casts," he said to himself, repeating one of his father's favorite sayings. Decision made, Navid turned his boat toward shore. He would need to preserve the fish's freshness and beauty for the journey to the palace. At home, he carefully cleaned his prize, preparing it for presentation without damaging its magnificent form. His wife Yasmin watched with wide eyes, alternating between excitement at the extraordinary catch and concern at her husband's ambitious plan. "The palace guards will never allow someone like you to approach the king," she warned, adjusting their youngest child on her hip. Navid carefully wrapped the fish in clean, damp cloths. "Perhaps not, but I must try." The journey to the royal palace took Navid through the bustling streets of the capital, his precious burden drawing curious glances from passers-by. The common folk rarely approached the royal district with its imposing walls and vigilant guards. As he drew nearer, the buildings grew more elaborate, the people more finely dressed, and Navid increasingly aware of his simple clothing and rough appearance. The palace itself rose before him like something from another world, its towers and domes glittering with gold and colored tiles under the midday sun. Guards in polished armor stood at attention before massive gates inlaid with intricate patterns of bronze and silver. Navid approached with his heart hammering in his chest, the carefully wrapped fish cradled in his arms. "Halt!" commanded the nearest guard, his voice sharp and authoritative. "State your business." Navid swallowed hard. "I bring a gift for His Majesty, King Khusro Pervez, a fish of extraordinary size and beauty caught this morning in the Gulf." The two guards exchanged glances, poorly concealed amusement in their eyes. "His Imperial Majesty does not receive gifts from common fishermen," the taller guard replied dismissively. "Take your catch to the market where it belongs." Navid stood his ground, drawing himself up to his full height. "With respect, this is no ordinary fish. It is a specimen worthy of the king's attention. I ask only that someone from the court look upon it and judge for themselves." The guards might have sent him away with harsher words had not an elderly court official been passing by at that moment. Hearing the exchange, the man paused, his curiosity piqued. "What is this about a fish?" he inquired, his voice carrying the refined accent of high Persian nobility. The guard bowed respectfully. "Nothing of importance, Lord Hormozd. A fisherman with delusions of addressing His Majesty." The elderly nobleman's eyes settled on Navid with evaluating intensity. "Let me see this remarkable specimen." With careful movements, Navid partially unwrapped his precious cargo, revealing the gleaming scales and impressive size of his catch. Even in the few hours since it had been pulled from the sea, it had lost none of its magnificence. Lord Hormozd's eyebrows rose slightly, the only indication of his surprise. Having served in the royal court for decades, he had developed a talent for recognizing opportunities for royal diversion. The king had been in a somber mood that morning, brooding over reports from the empire's eastern borders. Perhaps an unusual interruption might improve his temperament. "Follow me," he instructed Navid, much to the guard's evident surprise. "I make no promises, but the king may find your catch of interest." Navid followed the nobleman through the palace gates and into a world of luxury beyond his wildest imaginings. Marble floors, polished to a mirror shine, stretched before him. Elaborate mosaics depicting hunting scenes and ancient legends adorned the walls, and the air carried the exotic scents of incense and perfumes from distant lands. Servants in fine livery moved silently through vast chambers, their eyes downcast as the nobleman passed. They paused in an antechamber where Lord Hormozd instructed Navid on basic court etiquette: how to approach, when to bow, how to address the king, and, most importantly, when to remain silent. Navid absorbed these instructions with intense concentration, aware that any misstep could result in his immediate dismissal or worse. "The king values both honesty and cleverness," the elderly nobleman advised. "Be truthful, but not dull." After what seemed an eternity of waiting, during which Navid's anxiety mounted with each passing moment, a royal attendant summoned them to the throne room. Navid's legs felt weak as he followed Lord Hormozd through massive doors inlaid with ivory and precious metals. The throne room of King Khusro Pervez was designed to inspire awe in all who entered. Sunlight streamed through high windows of colored glass, creating patterns of light across the polished floor. Columns carved from rare marbles supported a ceiling adorned with intricate paintings depicting celestial scenes. Courtiers in richly embroidered garments lined the chamber, their conversations falling silent as they noticed the unusual visitor in their midst. And there, upon a throne elevated on a series of marble steps, sat King Khusro Pervez himself. His reputation for magnificence was not exaggerated. His royal robes shimmered with gold thread and jewels, and the famous crown of the Sasanian kings rested upon his brow, its pearls and rubies catching the light with every slight movement. His beard was perfectly groomed, framing features that managed to be both handsome and imposing. Despite approaching 50 years of age, he retained the powerful build and commanding presence of his youth. Lord Hormozd approached the throne and bowed deeply. "Your Imperial Majesty, I present a fisherman who has brought something that may interest you." The king's expression remained neutral, though a flicker of curiosity crossed his dark eyes. "Approach," he commanded, his voice resonating through the chamber. Navid moved forward with careful steps, conscious of the hundreds of eyes following his progress. He knelt at the prescribed distance from the throne and bowed his head respectfully. "Rise and show us what you have brought," the king instructed. With hands that he willed not to tremble, Navid unwrapped his precious cargo, revealing the fish in all its splendor. Murmurs rippled through the assembled courtiers. Even in this setting of opulence and luxury, the magnificent creature commanded attention with its unusual size and beauty. King Khusro leaned forward slightly, his interest evident. "Come closer." Navid approached the steps of the throne, holding the fish where the king could examine it more clearly. "Where did you catch such a specimen?" the king inquired. "In deeper waters of the Gulf, Your Majesty, where I do not usually cast my nets. Something drew me there this morning before dawn." "Fate, perhaps," the king mused, studying the iridescent scales. "I have seen many fish brought from those waters, but none like this. It is indeed exceptional." A mixture of pride and relief washed through Navid. The king was pleased with his offering. The risk of approaching the palace had been worthwhile. "What reward do you expect for bringing this to your king?" Khusro asked, his gaze shifting from the fish to the fisherman's face. This was the critical moment. Navid knew that his answer could determine whether he left the palace enriched or empty-handed. He could name a specific sum, but what amount would be appropriate? Too little would undervalue his extraordinary catch. Too much might seem presumptuous or greedy. In that moment of decision, Navid recalled something his grandfather once told him. "When speaking to the powerful, let their pride guide your words." Drawing a deep breath, he made his choice. "Whatever is worthy of a great king like you, your majesty," he replied, his voice clear and respectful. The answer was perfect in its simplicity and psychological insight. It placed no specific demand on the king while simultaneously appealing to his self-image as a magnificent and generous monarch. By leaving the decision entirely in Khusro's hands, Navid elevated the king's position and authority rather than imposing expectations. A slight smile appeared on the king's face. The fisherman's cleverness had not gone unnoticed. Khusro was accustomed to petitioners who either groveled excessively or made overly bold requests. This simple fisherman had done neither, instead offering a response that acknowledged royal prerogative while maintaining his own dignity. The king turned to his treasurer, who stood nearby holding the accounts of the day. "This fish pleases me. Give this man 4,000 dinars as reward." A collective intake of breath swept through the throne room. 4,000 dinars was an extraordinary sum, enough to purchase lands and livestock, to build a substantial home, to live in comfort for years. It was a fortune that would transform the fisherman's life completely. Navid himself could scarcely believe what he had heard. The amount was far beyond anything he had dared to hope for. He bowed deeply, overwhelmed with gratitude. "Your Majesty's generosity knows no bounds. May your reign be long and glorious." The treasurer motioned for Navid to follow him to receive his payment. As he backed away from the throne with repeated bows, Navid's mind was already racing with thoughts of what this unexpected wealth would mean for his family. His daughter would have a dowry worthy of a merchant's son rather than another fisherman. His children would receive educations previously unimaginable. His wife could rest her work-worn hands at last. What he failed to notice in his joy was the figure partially concealed behind an ornate screen to the side of the throne. Queen Shirin, the king's beloved wife, had observed the entire exchange with growing displeasure. Born to nobility herself, and raised with keen political awareness, she had developed a protective instinct regarding the royal treasury and her husband's sometimes excessive generosity. 4,000 dinars for a fish, no matter how exceptional, struck her as absurd extravagance. Moreover, she suspected manipulation in the fisherman's carefully chosen words. As the king returned to other court business, she made a mental note to watch this fortunate fisherman's departure. The treasurer led Navid to an antechamber where the payment was counted out from the royal coffers, gleaming gold coins bearing the king's profile, each worth a month's income for an ordinary laborer. The fortune was placed in a sturdy leather pouch, which Navid secured carefully within his simple garments. He could scarcely believe that he had entered the palace that morning as a humble fisherman and would leave as a wealthy man. With the precious pouch secured, he followed a court attendant back through the labyrinthine palace corridors toward the main entrance. His step was lighter now, his mind filled with joyous plans for the future. The extraordinary events of the day seemed almost dreamlike in their improbability. The main hall of the palace stretched before him, its marble floor gleaming in the afternoon light. Freedom and a transformed future lay just beyond the massive entry doors. Navid walked carefully, still somewhat overwhelmed by his surroundings and good fortune. And then it happened. Perhaps it was his unfamiliarity with the weight of so many coins, or his distracted thoughts of the future, or simply a moment of clumsiness born from excitement. Whatever the cause, a single coin slipped from the pouch and fell to the polished floor with a distinctive metallic ring. The gold dinar spun briefly before settling, the king's profile clearly visible on its surface. Instinctively, Navid bent to retrieve the fallen coin. It was, after all, part of his newfound wealth, and he had been poor long enough to value even a single coin. His fingers had just closed around the golden disk when a woman's voice rang out sharply across the hall. "Stop!" Navid straightened immediately, the coin clutched in his hand, and found himself facing Queen Shirin herself. She had emerged from a side corridor, several attendants following in her wake. Her beauty was renowned throughout the empire, with delicate features framed by elaborately arranged dark hair adorned with pearls. Her robes of fine silk shimmered with subtle embroidery as she approached, her expression one of stern disapproval. "Your Majesty," Navid said, bowing deeply before the queen. "So this is gratitude," she remarked coldly, her voice carrying in the suddenly silent hall. "My husband gives you a fortune beyond imagining for a single fish, yet you cannot bear to lose even one coin?" Navid remained bowed, keenly aware that his wonderful fortune had suddenly become precarious. The queen's displeasure could easily result in the reversal of the king's generosity. "Return with me to the throne room," she commanded. "The king should see what manner of man he has rewarded so lavishly." With a sinking heart, Navid followed Queen Shirin back through the palace corridors. Court attendants and nobles parted before them, curiosity evident in their expressions. Word of the fisherman's extraordinary reward had already spread through the palace, and now it seemed there would be an unexpected epilogue to the tale. The throne room had emptied somewhat since his earlier audience, but King Khusro still sat upon the throne, discussing matters of state with several advisers. He looked up with surprise as his queen approached with the fisherman in tow. "My husband," Queen Shirin announced, "I believe you should know more about the man you have so generously rewarded." The king's expression shifted to one of inquiry as he gestured for her to continue. "This fisherman received 4,000 dinars from your royal treasury," she explained. "Yet, as he was leaving, he dropped a single coin and immediately stooped to retrieve it. Such is his gratitude for your boundless generosity that he cannot part with even one dinar." All eyes in the throne room turned to Navid, who stood with the coin still clutched in his hand. The king's expression darkened slightly as he studied the fisherman. "Is this true?" he asked, his voice notably cooler than during their previous exchange. Navid knew that his response in this moment would determine whether he left the palace a wealthy man or a disgraced one. The fortune that had seemed securely his now hung in the balance. Navid stood in the cavernous throne room, acutely aware that the fortune he had just received hung by the thinnest thread. The cold disapproval in Queen Shirin's eyes contrasted sharply with the uncertainty now visible in King Khusro's expression. The coin felt heavy in Navid's palm, its golden surface warming against his skin as courtiers watched the scene unfold with undisguised interest. Queen Shirin stood regally beside the throne, her embroidered silk robes catching the afternoon light that streamed through the high windows. Her presence commanded attention even next to her royal husband, and her influence over court matters was well known throughout the empire. She was intelligent, educated, and fiercely protective of both the kingdom's resources and her husband's reputation. "Well?" the king prompted, his earlier warmth notably diminished. "What explanation do you offer for such behavior?" Navid felt time slow around him. He could deny nothing, as the queen and her attendants had witnessed his actions. A lie would only compound his offense. An apology might seem to confirm the accusation of ingratitude. The wealth that would transform his family's life was slipping away with each heartbeat. In that critical moment, Navid looked down at the coin in his palm. The profile of King Khusro Pervez was stamped into the gleaming metal, detailed enough to capture the strong lines of the royal features and the distinctive crown of the Sassanid dynasty. The king's image stared up at him, and in that instant, inspiration struck. Navid raised his eyes to meet the king's gaze directly, his expression shifting from anxiety to earnest sincerity. "Your Majesty," he began, his voice steady despite the stakes, "it is true that I stooped to retrieve this coin when it fell. Not because I begrudged its loss from the immense fortune you bestowed upon me, but because it bears your royal image." He held up the coin so that the king's profile was visible to all. "I could not bear the thought that someone might tread upon the face of our great king. Such disrespect, even if accidental, would be unthinkable to one who has benefited so greatly from your generosity." A hush fell over the throne room. The cleverness of the response hung in the air, its brilliance evident to all present. With a few carefully chosen words, Navid had transformed an apparent act of greed into a demonstration of profound respect. The perceived character flaw had become a virtue, all through the lens of reverence for the monarch. King Khusro's expression remained unreadable for what seemed an eternity to Navid. Then, almost imperceptibly at first, the corners of the king's mouth began to curve upward. The smile spread until it illuminated his entire face, and a moment later, deep, resonant laughter filled the throne room. "By the glory of the empire," Khusro exclaimed when his laughter subsided, "that is well answered indeed." He turned to his queen, whose expression had shifted from disapproval to grudging admiration at the fisherman's quick thinking. "You see, my beloved Shirin? This is no ordinary fisherman we have rewarded today, but a man of exceptional wit." The queen inclined her head slightly, acknowledging both her husband's words and the fisherman's cleverness. Though not entirely pleased, she recognized that Navid had responded to her challenge with remarkable poise and intelligence. Khusro returned his attention to Navid, his good humor fully restored and seemingly enhanced by the exchange. "For such quick thinking and eloquence, you deserve further reward," he announced. "Treasurer, give this man another 4,000 dinars." The proclamation sent renewed shock waves through the assembled courtiers. 8,000 dinars in total for a fisherman was unprecedented, the kind of reward normally reserved for military commanders who captured enemy fortresses or diplomats who negotiated favorable treaties. It was a sum that would secure not only Navid's immediate family, but generations of his descendants. The treasurer, who had been observing from nearby, stepped forward with a bow. "At once, Your Majesty." Queen Shirin's lips pressed into a tight line, but she made no further objection. The king's decision was final, and she was wise enough to know when further intervention would be counterproductive. Instead, she watched thoughtfully as Navid bowed deeply to the king, his gratitude evident in every line of his body. "May your reign be eternal, Your Majesty," Navid said with genuine feeling. "Your wisdom and generosity will be remembered in my family for generations to come." The king nodded, pleased by the response. "Use your fortune wisely, fisherman. It seems you have the intelligence to make it grow rather than dwindle." "I will honor your faith in me, Your Majesty." With the audience clearly concluded, Navid backed respectfully from the royal presence, maintaining the proper protocol he had been hastily taught earlier. This time, the leather pouch containing his original reward was joined by a second, equally heavy with gold coins. As he secured them carefully within his garments, he could scarcely believe the transformation that had occurred in a single day. The treasurer personally escorted him from the palace, perhaps to ensure there would be no further incidents. As they walked, the official spoke quietly. "You have witnessed both the king's generosity and the queen's vigilance today," he observed. "Few men walk the narrow path between them so skillfully." Navid nodded, understanding the subtle message. "I am merely a fisherman blessed by extraordinary fortune, both in my catch and in my king's appreciation." The treasurer studied him with new respect. "Perhaps you were a fisherman when the sun rose this morning, but you leave the palace as something different. Wealth changes a man's place in the world, and clever words in the right moment can alter destiny." They reached the palace gates, where the same guards who had initially barred Navid's entry now regarded him with barely concealed amazement. News traveled quickly through the palace, and the tale of the fisherman's double reward had preceded him. "Remember that the king's favor, once granted, must be maintained," the treasurer added as they parted, "and the queen's eyes are everywhere in the capital." Navid thanked him for the advice and stepped through the gates into the late afternoon sunlight. The weight of the coins against his body reminded him that the incredible events of the day were real rather than some fantastic dream. He stood for a moment, allowing the enormity of what had transpired to sink in fully. The journey home took him through streets that were identical to those he had traversed that morning, yet everything appeared different through the lens of his changed circumstances. Shops and market stalls that had once seemed to offer goods beyond his reach would now welcome his patronage. Neighborhoods that had represented unattainable luxury might soon contain his family's new residence. When he arrived at his humble dwelling near the harbor, Yasmin rushed to meet him, her face tight with worry. His children gathered around him, their expressions shifting from concern to curiosity at the unusual solemnity of his return. "What happened?" Yasmin asked, searching his face for clues. "You've been gone so long. When you didn't return from the palace, I feared the worst." Navid embraced his wife, then stepped back and carefully withdrew the two heavy pouches from within his garments. "The king found my gift worthy," he said simply, opening one pouch to reveal the gleaming gold coins within. His family stared in disbelief. His eldest daughter touched a coin hesitantly, as if it might disappear upon contact. His young son asked innocently if they were real. Yasmin looked from the fortune in her husband's hands to his face, tears welling in her eyes as she understood that their lives had irrevocably changed. 8,000 dinars, Navid told them quietly. 4,000 for the fish itself, and another 4,000 for remembering that even a fallen coin bears the king's image. That evening, as neighbors wondered at the unusual activity at the fisherman's modest home, Navid recounted the day's events to his astonished family. He described the opulence of the palace, the majesty of the king, the beauty and shrewdness of Queen Shirin, and the moment when his future had balanced on the edge of disaster before being restored by quick thinking. "It wasn't just luck," he explained to his children as they sat wide-eyed around the simple table that would soon be replaced by one of finer craftsmanship. "I learned long ago that powerful people care more about their image than anything else. When the queen accused me of ingratitude, I had to find a way to turn her accusation into proof of my respect for the king." His eldest daughter, who had inherited her father's quick mind, nodded thoughtfully. "So you weren't really thinking about the king's image on the coin when you picked it up?" Navid smiled. What matters is not what I was thinking then, but what I said when questioned. In life, children, it's not always about the truth of the moment, but the wisdom of the response. The family spent hours discussing how their newfound wealth would be used. Yasmin, practical even in the face of sudden prosperity, insisted that a portion be set aside for leaner times. The children dreamed of new clothes, toys, and the previously impossible prospect of formal education. Navid himself contemplated investments that would make the money grow rather than diminish over time. Perhaps partnerships with merchants whose ships sailed to distant lands carrying valuable cargo. As night fell over the Persian capital, the tale of the fisherman's extraordinary day began spreading through the city. Palace servants who had witnessed the events shared the story with family members who passed it to neighbors and friends. By the following morning, variations of the account could be heard in marketplaces, taverns, and workshops throughout the region. Some versions emphasized the magnificence of the fish, describing it as large enough to feed 50 men or possessing scales that shone like precious gems. Others focused on the queen's intervention, portraying her as either a jealous impediment to royal generosity or a wise steward protecting the treasury from exploitation. All agreed, however, on the cleverness of the fisherman's response when confronted about the fallen coin. 3 days after his life-changing visit to the palace, Navid was surprised to receive a visitor at the new residence he had quickly arranged for his family. A court official arrived bearing an invitation that was equal parts honor and command. King Khusro requested his presence at a small gathering of advisers and favored courtiers the following evening. "The king found your straightforward manner refreshing," the official explained. "He wishes to hear your perspectives on matters affecting common subjects of the empire." So began Navid's unexpected integration into the periphery of court life. Though never becoming part of the inner circle of nobles and lifelong courtiers, he occupied a unique position as a man who had risen from humble origins through a combination of extraordinary luck and quick thinking. The king occasionally called upon him to provide the perspective of ordinary citizens on matters of governance, taxation, or public works. Navid navigated this new role with the same careful intelligence that had saved his fortune in that critical moment before the throne. He spoke honestly when asked direct questions, but measured his words to avoid giving offense. He maintained respectful relations with noble courtiers without attempting to present himself as their equal. Most importantly, he never forgot the treasurer's warning about maintaining the king's favor and respecting the queen's influence. Over time, Queen Shirin herself came to regard the former fisherman with a degree of respect. While she never fully approved of her husband's extravagant reward for what she still considered a simple fish, she acknowledged Navid's wisdom in his subsequent actions. Unlike others who had received royal largesse and squandered it on ostentatious displays or dissipation, he invested his wealth prudently and lived well, but modestly. "The fisherman proves himself worthy of his fortune after the fact," she remarked to Khusro one evening after Navid had offered particularly astute advice regarding harbor taxes. "Perhaps your generosity was more prescient than excessive." The king smiled, pleased by this grudging approval. Sometimes the greatest wisdom lies in recognizing potential before it has fully revealed itself. As years passed, the story of the fisherman and the king became part of Persian cultural lore, retold with embellishments and variations, but maintaining its essential wisdom. Understanding the psychology of the powerful could prove more valuable than gold. The tale served as instruction for generations of commoners on the art of addressing royalty and nobility without compromising one's dignity. For Navid's family, the transformation was profound, but managed with intelligence. His children received the finest education available, learning not only reading, mathematics, and history, but also the subtle arts of commerce and diplomacy. His daughters made advantageous marriages to respectable merchant families, while his son eventually took over the trading business Navid had established with his unexpected wealth. The fishing boat that had carried him to that fateful deeper water was preserved rather than discarded, moved from the harbor to the garden of their new home as a reminder of their origins. Navid would occasionally run his hand along its weathered hull, remembering the pre-dawn morning when he had set out as a simple fisherman and returned as a man of means and influence. On special occasions, when friends and family gathered at his home, Navid would sometimes be asked to recount the story of his extraordinary change in fortune. Though tempted to embellish the tale as others had done, he always told it plainly, emphasizing not the magnificence of the fish or the splendor of the palace, but the critical lesson he had learned. "In this world," he would say, "there are three powers that matter above all others: fate, which brings opportunities we neither expect nor deserve; wisdom, which allows us to recognize and seize these opportunities; and understanding, which helps us navigate the desires and fears of those more powerful than ourselves." He would then produce a single gold coin from his pocket, one of the original dinars from King Khusro's reward, preserved untouched through the years. The king's profile remained clearly visible on its surface, a reminder of the moment when disaster had been transformed into triumph through the strategic application of flattery. "Remember," he would tell his children and eventually his grandchildren, "it is rarely the actions of the powerful that determine our fate, but rather their perception of those actions. Feed a man's ego, and he will keep rewarding you." This principle guided the family's rising fortunes over subsequent generations. While they never attained nobility, they established themselves as respected merchants and advisors, known for their ability to work effectively with powerful interests while maintaining independence and dignity. The tale of their ancestors' clever response became a foundational story, teaching each new generation the value of quick thinking and psychological insight. For King Khusro Pervez, the incident reinforced his self-perception as a monarch of exceptional generosity and discernment. His decision to reward the fisherman twice became, in his mind, evidence of his own wisdom in recognizing and nurturing talent, regardless of its origins. The story spread throughout the kingdom and beyond, enhancing his reputation as a ruler of magnificence and largesse. Queen Shirin, with her characteristic perception, recognized the deeper lessons of the encounter. While her husband focused on the loyalty and respect his generosity had purchased, she understood the more subtle exchange that had occurred. Navid had provided not just a magnificent fish, but also an opportunity for the king to demonstrate his munificence before the court. The fisherman's clever response about the coin had given Khusro the pleasure of feeling both respected and insightful for rewarding such wit. As the years passed and the Sassanid Empire faced increasing challenges from external enemies and internal tensions, the story of the fisherman and the king persisted, evolving from recent event to cultural parable. Courtiers and commoners alike recognized its fundamental truth about power, perception, and the delicate art of mutual manipulation that characterized relationships across social boundaries. In markets and gathering places throughout the empire, the tale was told and retold, sometimes with the fisherman portrayed as a folk hero who outwitted royalty, other times as a lesson in the proper way to address those of higher station. Parents used it to instruct children in the practical wisdom needed to navigate a world where direct power was concentrated in few hands, but indirect influence remained available to the clever. For Navid himself, the extraordinary events of that single day never lost their sense of wonder. Even decades later, when his trading ventures had brought him wealth that far exceeded the king's original gift, he would sometimes wake before dawn, drawn by old habit to the hours when fishermen set out to cast their nets. On such mornings, he would walk to the harbor and watch the small boats heading out to sea, remembering his former life with neither regret nor disdain, but with appreciation for the strange currents of fortune that had carried him from those waters to the marble halls of power. The final proof of the tale's impact came many years later, when another fisherman, inspired by the now legendary story, brought an unusually large pearl to the palace. When asked what reward he expected, he repeated Navid's famous words, "Whatever is worthy of a great king like you." King Khusro, by then an older man with a long reign behind him, laughed in recognition of the familiar phrase. "Your predecessor set a costly precedent," he remarked, but nevertheless awarded the man generously. The cycle of flattery and reward continued, perpetuating both the king's reputation for magnificence and the understanding among his subjects that appealing to royal ego remained the surest path to royal favor. This principle, first demonstrated so effectively by a humble fisherman who recognized the value of deferring to a powerful man's self-image, became embedded in Persian court culture. Long after both Navid and King Khusro had passed from the world, their brief interaction continued to influence the subtle dynamics between rulers and those who sought their favor. In this way, a single clever phrase, spoken at exactly the right moment, created ripples that extended far beyond its immediate context. The 8,000 dinars that transformed Navid's life represented only the most tangible outcome of his insight. More significant was the lasting cultural impact of the wisdom he demonstrated. Understanding the psychology of power often proves more valuable than any material skill or resource. From generation to generation, the core truth of the fisherman's story remained constant and relevant, applicable to changing times and circumstances. Feed a man's ego, and he will keep rewarding you. This insight, that flattery directed at the powerful, is not merely sycophancy, but a sophisticated tool for achieving one's aims, transcended its origins to become part of the collective wisdom of a civilization.